The Nigeria Data Protection Commission has set December 2023 for data protection compliance monitoring in line with provisions of the Act, which mandates all data controllers and data processors to get registered within 6 months of the enactment of the law. The Commission has therefore urged banks, telecommunication operators, educational institutions, government parastatals, and other organizations that collect and process data in Nigeria to register with the Commission between now and December 2023. Well, let's understand all of this. And joining me to do this from Abuja is a senior manager in tax advisory and regulatory services, Anderson, Nigeria, Dr. Samuel Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim, good afternoon. It's really good to see you.
Good afternoon. Many thanks for having me on the show today. Yes.
All right. Doc, let me ask like this so that everyone watching us will get to understand this better. Can we start with the responsibility of the NDPC and why they're embarking on this? Why now? Before I tell you that, does it further support that fact that we have issues with data in this part of the world?
Okay, many thanks. So the NDPC, the Nigerian Data Protection Commission, is the successor body of the Nigerian Data Protection Bureau, and it's a function that was originally handled by NITDA, the National Information Technology Development Agency. So primarily, the NDPC is the regulator for data privacy and data protection in Nigeria. And it's important to also mention that we live in the digital age now, and in the information age where data is gold, and if you look at some of the biggest companies around the world, there are companies that are heavy, in terms of processing of data. But that comes with its flip side, because the more data you hold on a person, the more of his privacy, you are infringing upon, or the capability of breaching his privacy increases as well. So the regulator is there to be the middleman to see that innovation continues to happen, or it happens legally within the ambits of the law in a way that is ethical and in a way that is protective of the constitutional rights of individuals whose data, is being collected.
We'll see here data. Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead.
Yes. And speaking to the mandate issued by, and the deadline issued by the Commission, yes. That's the NDPC. It's a December deadline, and there's a new act which formally establishes the Commission. That's the Nigerian Data Protection Act. Section 5D of that act is very clear on the fact that data controllers and data processors of significant importance are required to register with the Commission. So the Commission is exercising that power, in Section 5, Paragraph D of the Act, by issuing this deadline. But I know for a fact that the Commission had also, over the last few weeks, been working on setting up a platform to enable companies, carry out this compliance obligation. But that's just one of many compliance obligations, because there are several other compliance obligations. For example, organizations are required to conduct a mandatory audit and file their audit report before the 15th of March every year. So in addition to the December deadline, there's a March 15th deadline by next year that companies would also be required to do an audit and file a report. Even though it's a self-audit, but they can't literally carry it out themselves and file the report. They are to do that through licensed consultants, which are called data, protection compliance organizations. And there are a number of licensed organizations. So it's the responsibility of these data controllers and data processors. But just to make a distinction, the obligation to do the registration, before December 2023 applies to only data controllers and processors of significant importance. But the other obligation for March 15th, which is the filing deadline, is mandatory for all data controllers and processors in Nigeria. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about 500,000 of data controllers and processors in this part of the world. How cumbersome or how easy would this be to get everyone registered before December?
Okay, so historically, the commission, while they were a bureau and while they were also need at that time, they had shown a lot of regulatory understanding. So we've seen situations where they extended the deadline just at the niche of the deadline. Further extensions were approved and granted. But I think they normally would wait to assess the compliance level, assess, the complaints, assess all of the difficulties, and that would inform them, and help them to make an informed decision on whether or not to grant an extension. So I'm hopeful that if there are challenges at that time, because it still is high volume compliance, in terms of numbers, like you've mentioned. So we're likely going to see an extension if there is the need at that time.
Let's move further. With the Nigeria Data Protection Commission, we still have issues of data theft and all of these challenges. So how do we address all of this on the other side?
Okay, so good enough, the Act, which is the Nigerian Data Protection Act, and the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation gives them significant powers to carry out investigations, to also carry out some form of hearings as well. And that I know they are beginning to do, they are beginning to take seriously. A couple of months back, they had announced that they are currently investigating some banks, some telcos, some financial institutions, other financial institutions and the likes. So we were seeing a whole lot of investigation going on behind the scene. We're seeing situations where fines are being imposed, and we're also seeing and beginning to see collaborations, with other regulatory bodies to take proactive steps in terms of preventing data breaches, because it's one thing to prevent, it's another thing to begin to take regulatory actions after breaches had occurred. So one is proactive and the other is reactive, and we're seeing the commission adopt both approaches. We want to see more of that, and we do believe that they will increase the tempo.
Let's move on. It's really getting interesting. Now, let me ask you, as a player in this industry. So now, for us, the data owners, or we own the data, what is in this for us?
Okay, so good question. I'll start first with who owns the data. So generally, the data belongs to the individual, the human being, the natural, data subject. That's the natural person in that context. So in terms of your data, you own the data, but it may be in the custody or in possession of the data controller or the data processor. So that's why the law then gives you rights to be protected. So for the data subjects, there's so much protection, and your data cannot be used without a legal basis. And there are 6 possible legal bases in Nigeria. So your data can't just be used, like that. It could be your image, it could be your voice, it could be your picture, it could be your biometrics, it could be any other kind of data about you. It cannot be used by anyone without a legal basis, and the legal basis could be any of 6. Either consent, your consent, or a contract you would have signed or entered into, a public interest, when it's in public interest, or where there is a law, a statutory obligation to collect and process your data, or where there's a vital interest, or additionally, where there is a legitimate interest on ground. So those are the 6 bases, and if there is none of that in play, then your data cannot be used, and that's why we're beginning to see individuals take up cases, make regulatory complaints, and they're going to court, suing organizations that misuse their data. So for the data subjects, individuals like myself and you, it means that our rights is being protected and reinforced. For the data controllers, it means that they need to become more responsible in their use of data, and that's why you see many organizations now beginning to build in what we call data protection by design and by default. into their systems, into their operations, so that they are compliant even without taking any additional steps. That's what we're saying. And that's why you're also beginning to see organizations beginning to ensure that they also pay, for using images of people, voice recordings and things like that, because it's their personal data and it's also value for them, And of course, we can see the former Twitter X beginning to, make efforts to pay even for content. That also syncs with, the concept of data privacy and data protection. And, in answering the question, who owns the data? The person who owns the data should get rewarded for the use of his data, especially when it's commercialized.
Okay. Now, in this write-up, there's also this belief that if this is properly done, it could help improve foreign direct investment into our country, which is what everyone is looking out for at the moment. We know what is happening with our FX, our reserves, and all of that. So truly, how will this help improve that? Make us understand this better.
Okay, thank you very much. So now the world is a global village. Each country is trying to make itself more competitive, in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of meeting the basic requirements and metrics for attracting foreign investors. And one of the requirements foreign investors are beginning to look at, before committing to make investments in certain markets and in markets generally, is whether or not a country has data protection laws in place, whether or not those laws are being followed, and whether or not there are regulators in place in that country. And the reason why they are doing that is because it gives them a sense of, okay, we think we can do business here, we can use data lawfully, but additionally and more importantly, it touches on the issue of cross-border transfer of data. So if a country doesn't have a local law, does not have a local regulator in terms of privacy, then you are likely going to have situations where other countries cannot transfer data to that country, and with the way businesses operate now, there's need for seamlessness, so they want to be sure that, okay, I can transfer data from Europe to Nigeria. I can have a subsidiary here that does one leg of the business and another subsidiary does another leg of the business, and they can, operate seamlessly. But if you don't have a local law, then there'll be too many restrictions to transfer data to your jurisdiction. And then that stifles, operations, business, and the likes, right? So it's a very important component for investment right now. I'll give you one example. There's an arrangement in place because the US, for example, does not have a national data protection act. It doesn't. Various states have their own data protection act, which is for subnationals, So the EU felt this doesn't meet our standard because as a country, the United States does not have a national data protection law. So the EU, regulators then puts in place a privacy shield arrangement, more like an ad hoc arrangement based on which data could move across both jurisdictions and both markets, And somebody went to court to challenge it, to say, no, this isn't in place, and this what you have doesn't meet the requirement. And that was struck down by the court, that the ad hoc arrangement was struck down by the court, and it then left everybody, without clear direction. And that then created difficulties in, for tech companies to move data from one jurisdiction to another. Of course, ad hoc arrangements have been made, alternatives have been put in place, but there is now the need to put something much more robust and permanent, So it throws up those kind of challenges. And you have regulators in EU saying, oh, you must put you must use cloud services, cloud infrastructure within Europe, and do not transfer European data to the US. So these are real practical issues, even for big tech companies, and they all boil down to data protection and privacy.
A very interesting one. Before I let you go, we've had comments talking data. Everyone wants to get your view regards to this, that we have the bank verification number. We have the likes of the NINs. We have the national ID. Some of us have voters card, and all of this carry our data, driver's license. Are we going to get to a point where we can have a centralized unit where a click of my name, everything that has to do with me will just pop up? And when are we getting to that point, Dr. Samuel?
Okay, can you take the question again?
Okay,
I think I missed you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly now.
All right, I said we have the BVN, we have the NIN, we have all of this that carries our data, a voter's card, driver's license. Are we going to get to a point where we have a centralized system that we could, with a click, we can see all that has to do with us, our data and all of that, and centralize this at once? Or are we just going to continue to have series of cards that we carry along? That's a question from a viewer.
Okay, thank you very much. Very important question too. So Nigeria has come a long way from times when we had no such data, and now we have existing data like that. So the challenge now is multiplicity. And I know for a fact, because I'm within the industry, that regulatory bodies within government, although they've not been a coordinated effort to harmonize and integrate these database, on a national scale. But we've seen ad hoc arrangements where, for example, one regulatory body reaches out to the other for them to then have integration, or have an API so they can view both ways. So we're beginning to see that happen, where integrations happen. And with just one data, you can have access to other data held by other regulators. And we're seeing that happen between tax authorities, Corporate Affairs Commission, and many, many other regulatory bodies, right? So I do believe that we're making progress. It's been slow, but it's been consistent improvement, one step at a time. And hopefully, under this administration, we may eventually have a robust integration where it's a one-stop shop, for users of such data, just like we see in the US and in other very advanced economies. Yes.
Interesting conversation with you, I must say. Dr. Samuel Ibrahim is Senior Manager in Tax Advisory and Regulatory Services, Anderson, Nigeria. Thank you so much. We hope to have you join the program anytime soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great day.